Here is the part nobody warns you about. When shadow work actually works, people will not celebrate it. They will treat it like a betrayal. The disorienting fear that you are losing the version of yourself everyone loved is not failure. It is the first evidence of structural success. You feel it in the new friction of close relationships, the quiet refusal to comply where you once surrendered, and the sudden immunity to criticisms that used to ruin your week. You wonder if you are becoming cold. Others insist you have changed, framing your emergence as decline. Carl Jung understood this terrifying moment. Shadow integration makes you unavailable to the projections that once fed those closest to you. They experience the loss of this psychological food, not as growth, but as deprivation. And the language of deprivation always disguises itself as moral complaint. You don't care anymore. These are simply the frantic reports of a nervous system cut off from its unconscious supply. Most stop at the first half of that meaning. But when others' irritations with you escalate without you changing your behavior, you are being shown them. Your quiet emergence broke a dynamic they depended on. Their nervous system is now generating friction to force a restoration. This isn't malice. It is psychic starvation, reacting exactly like moral authority, attempting to crush your new interior direction. Culture hides this because it needs shadow work to remain a harmless, aesthetic hobby. It will never admit that real integration reorganizes relational reality. An integrated person can no longer be efficiently used. They become quietly, structurally uncooperative with systems demanding compliance. To protect itself, the culture frames your early success as failure, engineering your confusion. 7 signs. The first 3 explain why your recent life feels so abrasive. The middle 2 reveal the invisible structural transformation happening beneath your skin. The final 2 expose the formidable person you are becoming. At the end, I will reveal the one distinction separating permanent integration from those who collapse back into performance. If these ideas resonate with you, hit that subscribe button for more top-tier content. Also, drop a integration in the comments so I know you're ready. Let's dive in. The first sign is that a specific low-grade friction has entered relationships that used to be smooth, and you cannot identify anything you have done to cause it. This is the sign almost everyone doing real shadow work misreads. Because in the absence of a better framework, you assume that friction in your relationships means you are doing something wrong. You are not. You are, without conscious intent, doing something structurally different. And the structural difference is that you are no longer available for a set of automatic emotional labors that the relationship depended on without either of you noticing. Consider the specific texture. A parent used to call you, and you used to respond within minutes with a particular quality of attention that acknowledged their state, absorbed the emotional temperature of their complaint, and offered the specific soothing that returned them to baseline. You did this thousands of times over the years without recognizing that you were doing it. It was not a conscious performance. It was the automatic operation of a self that had been shaped from childhood to metabolize other people's emotional weather. And now, without a specific decision on your part, you have stopped doing it, or you do it slower, or you do it partially. The call comes, and you notice, before you answer, a small, unfamiliar pause. In that pause, a part of you that was not present in these interactions before asks a question the old you never asked. What is this call actually about, and what does responding to it cost me? The question is not hostile, it is simply, for the first time, present. And its mere presence changes the interaction, because the automatic labor no longer flows automatically. It has to be chosen. And when it is chosen with less quantity, less intensity, and less duration. than the parent's nervous system had come to expect over decades. The parent does not know that anything has changed on your end. They only know that something has changed on their end. The specific dopamine, the specific soothing, the specific sense of being fully absorbed by another person that used to arrive at the end of every call is now arriving in reduced form. Their system registers the reduction as loss. Their conscious mind, unable to name the actual mechanism, generates a story to explain the loss. The story usually sounds like this: you have become cold, you have become distant, you have changed, you do not care anymore. What is wrong with you? Here is the specific reframe you need, and I want you to take it in slowly because it is one of the most important reframes of the entire shadow work journey. Nothing is wrong with you. You have stopped subsidizing a specific emotional imbalance with your own unconscious labor. The imbalance is now visible. The person on the other end of the imbalance is experiencing its visibility as your defect. It is not your defect. It was before your invisible labor. It is now correctly no one's labor. And a relationship that cannot function without one party performing invisible labor is a relationship that was not, actually, functioning. It only appeared to be functioning because the invisible labor was masking the underlying imbalance. The friction is not the failure of the relationship. The friction is the first accurate reading the relationship has ever given you of what it actually was underneath the labor. The second sign is that a specific kind of anger has returned to you, and it is arriving at ordinary intensities in situations where the old you would have felt only mild irritation or nothing at all. This is one of the most misunderstood signs of successful shadow work, because both the culture and the mainstream framing of self-improvement have taught you to interpret anger as regression. They have told you that spiritual growth looks like unbroken calm, that a person doing inner work should become less reactive, that the presence of anger is a symptom of unresolved wounds. This framing is not exactly wrong, but it is dangerously incomplete, and the incompleteness is where many people abandon shadow work at the exact moment it starts working. Here is the more precise account. Anger, in the shadow, is not primarily a wound. Anger is often a signal that a boundary is being violated, and for most of your life, that signal was being systematically overridden by the specific configuration of your nervous system. You were trained from early childhood to convert the accurate signal of anger into something else: guilt, accommodation, self-blame, explanation, rationalization on behalf of the other party. Every time the signal arrived, an automatic override kicked in and translated it into an emotion that was more socially acceptable and more relationally functional. That override has been running so consistently for so long that you did not know it was running. You thought you were simply a person who did not get angry easily. You were not. You were a person whose accurate anger was being converted in real time into other emotions before you were consciously aware of it. Successful shadow integration takes the override offline, not immediately, not completely, but progressively. And as the override thins, the original signal begins to arrive in your consciousness intact. You feel anger where you used to feel guilt. You feel anger where you used to feel confusion. You feel anger where you used to feel that specific tiredness that had no cause you could name. And here is where the misreading happens. You conclude that you have become angrier. You have not. You have become more accurate. The anger was always there. It was simply being converted before you could feel it. Now you feel it. And the feeling is uncomfortable, both for you and for the people around you, because it means the automatic override that made you infinitely accommodating is no longer running at full strength. The specific texture of this in your daily life is that you notice, in the middle of an ordinary conversation, a specific hotness in your chest that was not there a year ago. Someone says the small, familiar, diminishing thing they have said for years, and instead of the old smooth transition into the reassurance you always offered, you notice a rise. The rise is not dramatic. It is not loud. It is simply for the first time present, and you have a choice in that moment that you have never had before. You can override the rise as you have done 10,000 times, or you can allow it to inform how you respond without letting it explode into performance. The second option is the shadow-integrated response. It is not the absence of anger. It is anger that has become intelligence. It is a specific signal being read as data rather than being suppressed as inconvenience. Over time, this reading becomes automatic, and the ordinary aggressions of your life stop passing through you unremarked. They get processed, they inform, they shape your responses, and the responses over months quietly reorganize your relational network into a shape that no longer requires the override to be tolerable. The third sign is a specific silence that has begun to appear in you where reactivity used to be, and it does not feel like the silence of suppression. This is important to distinguish because for most of your life, when you were silent in the face of provocation, the silence was suppression. It was your system swallowing an accurate response because the accurate response would have been socially costly. That old silence had a specific texture. It was tight. It was pressurized. It sat in your chest and stayed there long after the conversation ended. You would rehearse it later. You would compose the response you did not give. You would feel the residue of it for days. The new silence is different. It is silence that comes after the anger, not instead of it. The anger arises, is registered, is understood as data, and then a small internal question follows. Is this the moment to speak? Is this the audience worth the response? Is the specific provocation being offered by someone in a state that can receive a real answer? Or is it being offered by someone in a state where any real answer will be received as attack? And when the answer to those questions is no, the silence that follows is not suppression, it is decision. You are not swallowing, you are declining, and the difference in the body is enormous. The old silence produced residue, the new silence produces peace, because there is no unspoken response accumulating pressure. The response was spoken silently and completely inside you, and the decision to keep it unspoken externally was not a suppression, but a choice. Jung understood this precise transition, though he did not have the modern language for it. He understood that the mature ego, in relationship with an integrated shadow, becomes capable of holding the full range of its own reactions without being controlled by them. The reactive self must speak every reaction. The suppressive self must swallow every reaction. The integrated self has a third option. It can hold the reaction, understand it, and then decide what to do with it based on the actual situation rather than based on the automatic reflex. This third option is one of the most concrete evidences that shadow work is producing structural change rather than aesthetic change. Aesthetic change is when you learn the vocabulary and rearrange your interior story. Structural change is when your actual response mechanisms begin operating differently. The new silence is one of the earliest and most reliable signals that structural change is underway. You will notice this silence unsettles people. Silence, in most human interactions, is expected to be broken by the person who is in the weaker position. The one being criticized is expected to defend. The one being challenged is expected to explain. The one being tested is expected to prove. When you do not do these things, when the silence is not broken by you but must be broken by the other party, a specific reversal happens in the dynamic. The other party begins to feel, without being able to articulate it, that they are the one in the unstable position. Their nervous system was not prepared for this reversal, and their reaction, more often than not, is escalation. They will provoke harder, they will criticize more sharply, they will attempt to force the reaction that used to arrive automatically. And here is where you will need everything shadow work has been building in you, because meeting that escalation with the same silence is one of the specific tests the process runs on you. Passing it does not require aggression. It requires only the specific, cultivated capacity to keep holding your own response inside you until the moment you have chosen for it, if any, arrives. Now stop, because we are at the specific turn where most content on shadow work quietly betrays its audience. Most content on this subject frames the process as a series of positive interior developments that eventually make you feel more peaceful, more centered, more accepting. This framing is not exactly wrong, but it is so incomplete that it functions in practice as a lie. And the lie is why so many people who attempt shadow work quit within a year, convinced that they have been doing it wrong, when in fact they have been doing it correctly and were simply not prepared for what correctly feels like. Here is the reversal. Successful shadow work does not, in the middle stages, make you feel better. It makes you feel more real. And feeling more real, in the specific transition period, feels very often like feeling worse. Because feeling more real involves feeling accurately the exact quality of relationships you have been carrying, the exact cost of choices you have made, the exact texture of what your life has actually been, without the specific numbing that the unintegrated shadow was providing. That numbing was the specific tax you were paying for the peace of not knowing. Shadow integration ends the numbing. Which means, for a period, you know. You know what you have accepted for years that you should not have accepted. You know what you have paid for years that you should not have paid. You know what certain people have taken from you that they should not have taken. And this knowing in the middle stages is not liberating in the immediate sense. It is grief. It is quiet, ongoing grief for the specific interior peace that ignorance was purchasing, and for the specific years that the ignorance was consuming. The people who quit shadow work quit here. They reach the grief and they interpret it as evidence that the work is destroying them. They rush back to the numbing. They pick up the old accommodations. They restore the old dynamics. They tell themselves and everyone around them that they have found balance or perspective or gratitude, and what they have actually found is the specific comfort of returning to the unconscious. The people who stay because they have been told clearly in advance that the grief is the passage, not the destination, that the passage does end, that on the other side of the passage is a self that no longer needs the numbing because it can hold the real without being destroyed by it. But the passage requires knowing ahead of time that the discomfort of the middle stages is not evidence of failure but of accuracy. You are being told that now. Hold it. When the next wave of the grief arrives, and it will, you will need this framing to keep you from mistaking the passage for a dead end. Not everyone can hear this without flinching. Notice that you have not flinched. Notice that something in you has been waiting for someone to say plainly that the difficulty of this process is not a bug. It is the process. The specific psychology of shadow work involves confronting exactly what the unintegrated psyche had a specific purpose for hiding, and the confrontation is not, cannot be, comfortable in the middle. If it is comfortable, you are not doing it. You are decorating. The fifth sign is that specific boundaries have appeared in your life without you making formal declarations about them. This is one of the most subtle but reliable signs that integration is producing real structural change, because ordinary content on boundaries teaches you to enact them through announcement. You are told to have the difficult conversation. You are told to communicate your limits. You are told to name what you will and will not tolerate. This framing is not wrong for certain relationships, but it misses the deeper move that shadow integration produces. The deeper move is that certain boundaries simply become facts of your life without ever being negotiated externally. Consider the texture. There is a specific person in your life who used to be able to call you at any hour with a specific kind of emotional crisis, and you would answer, and you would give them the specific labor they required, and both of you called this care. Something has changed. You have not announced anything. You have not told them you will no longer be available for these calls. You have simply, over months, become slower to answer. And when you answer, you have become more concise. And when you are concise, you have become less absorbable. You did not decide any of this. You noticed it happening. The person on the other end noticed it happening. Neither of you has named it. And yet functionally, the arrangement has changed. The boundary is now real. It exists as a structural fact of the relationship, not as an announced policy. And structural boundaries, the kind that just exist without needing to be defended, are stronger than any announced boundary can be. Because announced boundaries can be argued with, structural boundaries can only be adapted to. This is the specific way shadow integration produces real change in your relational network, not through confrontation, though confrontation is sometimes necessary, through the quiet, cumulative fact of a self that is no longer available for the specific labor that certain relationships used to require. The absence of your labor is more powerful than any speech about your limits, because your labor was doing the actual work of maintaining the imbalance. Without your labor, the imbalance becomes visible, and the visibility is what forces adaptation. Some people will adapt, some will not. Both responses are data. Neither is your responsibility to manage. Your responsibility is to keep the labor withdrawn from the specific places it was being extracted, and to let the responses to the withdrawal be what they are. Here is the deeper cut. Boundaries that require constant announcement are usually boundaries that the person has not fully integrated. They still, at some level, doubt their own right to hold the boundary, and so they overcompensate by declaring it, defending it, explaining it. A boundary that has become fully integrated does not require any of this. It simply operates quietly as a fact of who the person now is, and the people around them adjust or drift or occasionally test the boundary, and the boundary holds, not because of any specific rhetorical strategy, but because the person's entire structure has quietly reorganized around it. This is what real integration looks like from the outside. It looks like a person who does not seem to be doing anything different, and yet whose life is being lived on completely different terms than it was 2 years earlier. The change is structural, and structural change is quieter than performative change, but incomparably more durable. The sixth sign is a specific unfamiliar silence in your interior, where the constant background hum of seeking approval used to live. This silence is one of the most disorienting features of successful shadow integration, because for most of your life, the hum of approval seeking was so constant that you did not know it was there. It was the ambient soundtrack of your consciousness. It ran under every decision. It shaped every calculation. It colored every experience. And now, in specific moments, sometimes for hours at a time, it is not there. And the absence of it is so unfamiliar that you sometimes wonder if you have lost something important. You have not. You have lost the specific overhead that was making every experience of your life more expensive than it needed to be. The approval-seeking hum was consuming a specific portion of your interior bandwidth at all times, and its removal has freed that bandwidth for the actual experiencing of your life. This is why, in this phase, ordinary experiences begin to acquire a specific vividness they did not have before. A meal tastes more like itself. A walk feels more like a walk. A conversation with a stranger feels more like an actual encounter. The reason is not that these experiences have changed. The reason is that your interior is now available to experience them without the specific overhead of running the approval calculation in the background. The specific test of this sign is that you begin to make small choices that no one around you would understand or endorse, and you find that the making of them does not require the specific defensive energy it used to require. You do not feel the need to explain them. You do not feel the need to justify them. You do not feel the need to test them against imagined audiences. You simply make them. And the specific interior quiet that follows the making is the specific quiet that shadow work has been building toward for the whole process. It is the quiet of a person whose center of gravity has moved from the outside to the inside. It is not the quiet of arrogance. It is not the quiet of defiance. It is the quiet of a person who has, quietly and without ceremony, taken responsibility for their own life at the level of the interior, and who no longer requires the ratification of others to know that a decision is right. Jung called this development, in various places, the movement from an outer authority to an inner authority. He was clear that this movement was not the abandonment of relationship with others. It was the reordering of the specific hierarchy of what informed your decisions. Before, the primary information was what others would think, feel, or say. After, the primary information was your own accurate perception of the situation, and what others might think became one input among many rather than the decisive input. This reordering is what allows the specific quiet to develop, and the quiet, once it develops, becomes one of the most stable features of the integrated self. It is not a temporary state. It is a permanent structural change. Once you have known interior quiet at this depth, you cannot unknow it, and every attempt by the world to reinstall the approval-seeking hum will be met by a specific interior resistance that was not available to you before. The seventh sign, and the deepest one, is that you have begun to feel, in specific moments, a strange affection for the parts of yourself you used to hate. Not tolerance, not acceptance in the polite, performative sense, actual affection. You look at the parts of yourself that you spent decades trying to hide, correct, or eliminate, and something in you softens toward them in a way that is not condescending, not therapeutic, not managed. You see the anger, and something in you says, of course. You see the neediness, and something in you says, of course. You see the ambition, the envy, the intensity, the specific traits that got you punished as a child, and something in you meets them not as enemies to be managed, but as parts of yourself that had specific reasons for being what they were. This is the second reversal, and it is the one almost no one prepares you for. Shadow work is usually framed as the confrontation with your darker parts, and this framing implies that the darker parts are eventually integrated in the sense of being controlled, managed, or absorbed. This framing is dangerously incomplete because the actual endpoint of shadow work is not the control of the shadow. It is the discovery that the shadow was, in significant part, wrong about itself. The shadow was not what you were told it was. The parts of yourself you were told were bad, unacceptable, or dangerous were often, on close examination, simply parts of yourself that a specific environment could not accommodate. Their badness was not intrinsic, it was situational. And in a different environment, or in the specific environment you can now build around them, they are not liabilities. They are the exact energies that make you fully yourself. Your anger, integrated, is not the enemy of your peace. It is the specific instrument by which your peace becomes possible, because it enforces the boundaries that peace requires. Your neediness, integrated, is not the enemy of your independence. It is the specific instrument by which you can recognize when a relationship is actually giving you what you need, rather than requiring you to pretend you do not need anything. Your intensity, integrated, is not the enemy of your relationships. It is the specific quality that makes you actually present in the relationships that can bear your full weight. And it is the specific quality that filters out the relationships that cannot bear your full weight, which is a filtering you should want to happen. Every trait you were taught to be ashamed of, examined without shame, turns out to have a specific and often essential function in the actual person you were supposed to become. And the recognition of this, when it arrives, produces the specific affection I am naming. You start to like the parts of yourself you spent decades trying to eliminate, not because you have talked yourself into liking them, but because you have finally understood what they were actually for. This is what Jung meant when he said that the goal of individuation was not the perfection of the self, but its completion. Perfection would have been the successful elimination of the shadow. Completion is the successful integration of the shadow, which is a very different achievement. Perfection would have made you a better mask. Completion makes you a real person, containing multitudes, capable of holding your own darkness without being consumed by it, and capable of holding your own light without becoming inflated by it. The completion is not comfortable at every stage, but at this stage, at the stage where the seventh sign appears, it is quietly beautiful. And you have earned, through the previous 6 signs, the right to feel this beauty without immediately doubting it. Now imagine 1 year forward, the specific texture of your life. You wake in the same body in the same room, but the interior weather has settled into something new. The friction with certain people has either resolved into a new equilibrium or produced the specific distances that were always going to be necessary. You do not think about those distances constantly. You have not written eulogies for those relationships. They simply exist now at the correct temperature. And the correct temperature is often cooler than the old temperature, and the coolness is not a wound. It is accuracy. The people who could adapt to the emerging you have adapted, and the relationships with them carry a specific quality that no relationship in your life carried before this process began. There is a specific rest inside these relationships that only becomes possible when both parties are dealing with a real self, rather than with a mask that is performing a real self. Your responses to ordinary provocation have restructured. You still feel the initial charge of anger, of hurt, of irritation, and you feel it more accurately than you used to. But the charge no longer organizes your responses in the automatic way it used to. There is a specific gap between the charge and the response. And in that gap, you are the one making the decisions. The decisions are more precise than they used to be. They are also, in aggregate, more sovereign. You are no longer being run by the specific reactions that used to run you. You are running them. Or more precisely, you are in relationship with them. And the quality of that relationship is what people around you can feel, even when they cannot name it. There is a specific density to your presence now that was not there 2 years ago. It is not weight. It is not force. It is presence itself, showing up more fully because the specific overhead of the mask has been reduced. The specific arrival that shadow integration produces is not, as most content will imply, an arrival at happiness. It is an arrival at reality, and reality, met by an integrated self, contains happiness, but it also contains all the other actual textures of a real human life. And the integrated self is, for the first time, able to hold all of them without collapsing into any single one of them. This is what Jung was pointing toward when he described individuation, not the ascent to a happier plane, the descent into your actual life, met at last by the specific self you were always going to be if the world had not required you to build a mask instead. You are on the road to this. You are farther along than you know. The 7 signs are not a checklist you are supposed to complete. They are a set of recognitions that, when they land, restructure how you understand what has been happening to you for the last year or two. If you recognize yourself in most of them, the work has been working. The friction you have been experiencing has been evidence. The grief has been passage. The silence has been arrival. And the specific, quiet affection you have begun to feel for the parts of yourself you used to hate is the specific signature of a self that is completing rather than perfecting. If this reached the part of you that has been quietly doing this work without adequate framing for the strangeness of the middle stages, subscribe. Not because I asked, because you understand now that this work is not the work of a single video. It is the work of years, and it requires a room where the work is treated with the seriousness it deserves, and where the middle stages are named honestly rather than glossed over. This is that room. What you have heard is one layer. There is deeper work on individuation, deeper work on the specific mechanics of holding an integrated self inside a culture designed to reward the mask, deeper work on the strategic detachment that makes long-term integration actually sustainable. Stay in the room, and whatever you do, don't stop now. The on-screen video matters more than you think. Trust me, you don't want to miss it. I'll see you there. See what others miss. Know what others fear. Become who others can't.